again at the source of the River Severn, on top of the Cambrian Mountains in the middle of Wales.
We've seen how the River Severn starts as a little trickle of water oozing out of the boggy mountainside, and how it flows down to the sea. We've also seen how different settlements have grown up alongside the river.
In this programme, we'll be looking at how people use the river to travel on. We'll also see how the river can be a barrier and some of the efforts people have made to cross it. Up here in the Welsh mountains, the river's too narrow, too steep and too fast-flowing to travel on, but it's easy enough to cross. This is the first bridge across the River Severn.
This little bridge doesn't have much trouble crossing the Severn, but we'll see some much bigger bridges later on. For the next 140 kilometres, although the River Severn gets wider, it's still too shallow and rocky for many boats to use safely. About the only boats that can manage in this shallow water are canoes.
In earlier times, the equivalent of a canoe was this little boat. It's called a coracle, and Charles Fogg still makes them. Charles, how are these things made?
They're made basically from a framework of wood, which can be ash or, in the case of the one you're sitting in, willow wands, and simply covered with cloth, which is waterproofed with hot pitch.
What kind of people would be using these coracles?
Mostly on the Severn now, they're just used for fun, for leisure. But in Wales, there are still a dozen pairs of licensed fishermen that go fishing for salmon.
The River Severn only starts being used for transport in a big way when we reach the town of Stourport.
And Stourport's exactly that. A port, but one that's around 100 miles from the sea. This is the old port itself, with its basin, an area of water surrounded by quays where the boats come and tie up.
Stourport Canal Basin, with its warehouses and moorings where boats could load and unload their goods, was built over 200 years ago. It was where canals from the industrial towns of the Midlands, like Birmingham and Wolverhampton, connected with the River Severn.
Canal boats carrying goods from the factories could come through here into one side of the Stourport Basin and come out the other side straight into the River Severn. From this point onwards, the Severn is officially navigable. This means that you can take a boat from here right the way down to the sea, which is what we're going to do.
But we're not going to travel by ourselves.
Put your bags on the floor of the seat and keep your paddles on the middle for a minute.
These are the children from Astley School near Stourport with their special bellboat canoe. They're off to explore the river and I'm going to go with them. Hi there.
Hi.
Whoop, is it safe to come across?
Take a seat on the far side. Follow the ones at the front. Big stream. Simon, are you concentrating on there?
Yeah, she will.
Simon? You're the person we're following.
Once you're out on the river, you see things from a completely different angle.
Children, if you look on the left here, you see the factories that used to be carpet mills, carpet factories a few years ago.
We're travelling south from Stourport.
In. Don't miss that stroke then.
This special bell boat is just like a floating classroom.
Right, you can see right in front of you there a large red cliff. Look, who can tell me what actually they can see has happened at the bottom of the face that the river's done to it? Daniel?
The river's worn the rock away.
Right. Does anyone know what this wearing the rock's called?
Erosion.
Erosion, that's right. Can you see how the river's undercut the rock right underneath there? Taken away the soft sandstone and carried it off down the river.
And a lot of that eroded sand ends up in little beaches along the river bank.
I've read them on the right now. In.
Suddenly, we spot a sort of road sign on the riverbank. Then we find our way is blocked. There's a row of metal drums strung across the river. There must be a reason for this. And there is. Just beyond the floating drums, the river goes over a waterfall. This isn't a natural waterfall, but a weir, a wall built across the river so the water pours over the top. Without the weir, the river would be too shallow for boats to use. With the weir, the water piles up behind it and becomes deep enough for boats to travel on.
But how do boats make the jump from one level to the other? Well, they go through special gates called locks, which lower the boat gently down to the level of the water below the weir.
Right, I think we can go straight in here. We're ready.
First, the big gates open to let us into the lock chamber.
Hannah will drift up to the left-hand side, Hannah, and you can get hold of the strings when we stop. Hold your paddles in the water. Not yet, Hannah, not yet.
Once we're in the chamber, the lockkeeper closes the gate behind us.
I think most of these major locks on the Severn are automatic all the way down to Gloucester.
So what's happening now?
Well, if you look over to the side there, you can see that gradually the water from this particular lock, the tank, is emptying out, and we're dropping the level. We've dropped 1/2 metre already.
Happens quite quickly, doesn't it?
Yes, quite surprising. It's almost it's a gigantic water lift. Slowly dropping down, centimetre by centimetre. Thousands of gallons of water pouring in.
When the water in the lock chamber reaches the same level as the river below it, the second set of gates can be opened.
Okay. Right, children, when your paddles are ready. Okay, off we go then. Ready, Simon, Adam? Off we go. In. Nice and gently as we come out to the lock gates.
The children continue exploring the river, but we have to move on. Now that the Severn is properly navigable, with its weirs and locks, more boats can use the river. This is Upton-on-Severn. It's a centre for pleasure craft.
For the next stage of our journey, I'm going with Steve Arbour on one of his pleasure crafts. Steve, hi.
Hi, Vanessa. Come
Right.
aboard.
Okay. Thank you very much.
We're still travelling south down the river.
How popular is pleasure cruising on the River Severn?
Well, there's hundreds of boats that use the Severn, and although it's a very long river, it's long enough so that it's not too busy compared to some of the rivers in the country like the Trent and the Thames. It's nicely spread out, so it's never congested.
So, what kind of a boat are we on now?
Well, this is a 27-foot river cruiser, a very modern design. It's designed to take up to 4 people for sleeping, but obviously you can take more on board with a fairly spacious cockpit area. It's got a shower, hot water, a proper toilet and a proper cooking area in the galley.
Do you particularly enjoy the River Severn yourself?
Yes, I do. It's lovely here, mainly because the Severn is in a very quiet rural part of the country, though there are 2 or 3 fairly large towns, so that you get a nice cross-section. There's very pretty areas, and there's also places you can moor up in the middle of a big city.
We've now reached the town of Tewkesbury. Here the River Severn is joined by the River Avon. It's a bit like a motorway junction for rivers. Right by the river is Healing's grain mill, and it's the start of the next stage of our journey.
We're going to go downriver with Chris Witts on his barge to collect some more grain for the mill. Hiya, Chris.
Hello, Vanessa.
We're ready for the off?
Right.
Great stuff. Well, fire up.
Okay. Let go, Dave.
So we leave the mill at Tewkesbury and set off towards the sea.
Chris, what kind of barge is this?
At present, she's a grain barge, but she was built to carry coal on the River Trent, built in Yorkshire in 1974.
So how long is she?
130 foot.
And how much could you carry at any one time?
We carry 250 tons of grain.
What would that be in terms of, say, lorries full?
That's equivalent to 10 big lorries.
Wow.
Up until the 1960s, there were lots of barges like this on the River Severn. They carried all kinds of things, like fuel oil and timber. But that's now all carried by road. This is one of the few other commercial craft on the river, a British Waterways tug and dredger that keeps the river clear of mud and sand. Now the Severn is mainly used by pleasure boats.
How easy is it to navigate along the River Severn?
It's not too bad on the upper reaches, but where we are at the moment in a section called the Parting, it is very narrow. Because the river is so shallow, when we come up loaded, more often than not, we're rolling on the bottom. And when we hit an extra large mud bank, we just grind to a halt and have to wait for a tug to come and put us off. You've got one chance of getting round here, or you've lost it. Well, you won't cut the trees back for us. Slow in, fast out.
So Chris managed to get his barge through all the sand and mud carried by the river. We're now approaching the city of Gloucester. Here we leave the River Severn to go into Gloucester docks. From Gloucester, our journey towards the sea continues not along the River Severn, but on this canal. It was built 200 years ago and is called the Sharpness Canal.
When it was built, the Sharpness Canal was the widest canal in the world, and it could take ships of up to 850 tons.
This canal was built to avoid the great tidal bends of the River Severn, with their shifting sandbanks. For nearly 30 kilometres, the river and the canal travelled together towards the sea. This is Sharpness Docks, where the canal joins the River Severn again. It's time for Chris to start loading up with grain to take back to the mill upriver in Tewkesbury. Sharpness docks are still used by seagoing ships. This one is from Turkey, with a cargo of stone for making roads. From here, it's through another lock gate for boats to get back into the River Severn. Moving on towards the sea, we come to some of the most famous river crossings in Britain. This is the first Severn Road Bridge, built in 1966 across the estuary. It carries cars, lorries and bicycles across the river between England and Wales, over a single span nearly 1,000 metres long.
Before the bridge was built, this slipway was where cars used to drive down to meet the ferry to get across the Severn.
Over the years, there have been many different ways of crossing this wide estuary.
We've nearly reached the sea now, and that's the second Severn crossing built in 1996.
Over 5 kilometres long, this second bridge is even longer than the first.
But under the river, there's another crossing that you can't see.
It's the railway tunnel, built over 100 years ago to take the main line between London and South Wales under the river.
And before that, here's where passengers used to get out of the trains from England, get into a boat and sail across the River Severn to Wales.
It's a lot easier to cross the river on the new bridge. The river, once a great barrier between two countries, now takes a few minutes to cross. It's the longest river crossing in Britain, going over the longest river in Britain.
And this is the end of our journey. This navigation beacon guides ships safely in and out of the mouth of the River Severn. If we go any further, we'll be in open sea.